The Saints defeat the Giants in what I'm deciding to call the toilet bowl. It was an ugly win for the Saints, but a win nonetheless. We'll talk about it. The good in terms of their young players stepping up, but also the bad. We'll talk about the draft stock of the Saints right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Vogel, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott Fickner. Injury lawyers. Been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, heard offshore. Scott Fickner handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So the Saints beat the Giants 14-11 in an ugly game that got, in a comical way, very interesting towards the end, with the Giants making a little bit of a comeback. And then the Saints, thanks to Bryan Bresee, who, by the way, was by far and away the MVP of this game with the way he played, blocking a game-tying field goal attempt from the New York Giants that would have sent this game into overtime. And I speak for everyone when I say this. I don't think any of us deserve to watch this game go into overtime and be subjected to another 10 minutes between these two sides, which played some pretty ugly football. So we'll jump into all of that. As always, guys, I want to encourage you, if you enjoy our content here at Buku Media, to make sure to smash that like button. It greatly helps out the channel. But more importantly, we want you to get your comments in the chat, your thoughts. And it doesn't even have to be about this game. It could just be about the Saints season in general, future thoughts about this team. Put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to have your voice be heard later on when we get to our Q&A section. So let's start off with just the main takeaway for me, and it's the fact that while the Saints did win and they do improve to 5 wins, and now they're 3-1 with Darren Rizzi as the interim coach, this team needs a lot of work. And I think if your takeaway was just, a win is a win, and I'm usually a big proponent of that, everything needs to be contextualized, especially for the Saints right now. And for you to play a Giants team that I personally believe is one of, if not the worst teams in the league. And I think if they're not the worst team, then maybe the Raiders are worse and they're like second worst. But for you to be on the field with them and they're missing their best player in Dexter Lawrence and arguably their second best player in Andrew Thomas, and this shit looks really close in an ugly manner, I think it's pretty frustrating, because I think there's moments where the Saints, have a 98-yard touchdown drive and they look to find their confidence, and then they just couldn't do that the rest of the game. They really couldn't muster another good drive to really put this ahead, other than that Juwan Johnson touchdown where I genuinely don't know what the Giants were doing. They left him wide open. I think for the Saints, had they come out today and they beat a lesser opponent, but they win by, 20, 21 points, 23 points, whatever, maybe it feels a little different, because, you'd understand the Saints team needs a lot of work. They're not contending anytime soon, but at least they're not just downright trash. And for them to just be in this game with the Giants where, look, you're 1 or 2 plays away from losing this at the end, I think it's kind of a brutal spot for the Saints to be. You kind of feel like they're in no man's land. And I'm a big believer in not tanking. I think that, for me, you guys know I'm a New Yorker growing up. I've seen the Giants and Jets lose an awful lot, and no matter how much they lose, they don't fix their team. So tanking can only get you so far if you have the right people to make the right picks and to build the right culture. So I'm not about tanking. I'm not saying the Saints would have benefited from losing this game. That's not what I'm saying. But you go into this game, they're outside of Bresee being great and Kendre Miller, who I'll talk about in just a minute. There's not a lot of positive takeaways for me, right? The run game struggled for most of this game. I thought Quinn Kubiak had maybe his most fraudulent play calling of his entire Saints tenure so far. And defensively, secondary was fine. Wasn't really concerned with the secondary. I thought Kool-Aid McKinstry had some nice moments. I thought Alontae Taylor had some nice moments. But they don't have an edge rusher that can just slam the door shut late in games when you need them to. Like, Bryan Bresee is by far their best pass rusher right now this season at 7.5 sacks. And honestly, at this rate, probably will reach double digits. He's been tremendous, but outside of him, you don't have that game changer that can just end games for New Orleans. So for me, that's a big problem. And on top of all this, by the way, you do lose Derek Carr to another injury, left hand, and a concussion is what he was evaluated for. If he doesn't play, let's say, for the rest of the season, and there's only 4 games left, I don't know. Commanders, Packers, Raiders, Bucks. Those are your next 4 games. Do the Saints win any of those outside of the Raiders? Probably not. So you lose your starting quarterback. That might not swing the scales for some people, but you lose your starting quarterback. there were moments where you couldn't do enough defensively in the pass rush late in games. Drew Lock scrambled a little bit too much for my liking. Granted, Drew Lock still stunk, and I give the Saints credit for most of that. But not being able to slam the door shut effectively, that bothered me. A lot of special teams miscues. I think it's poetic, kind of that the Saints win on a special teams play from Brian Brzee. But there were a lot of moments in this game where they really struggled in that phase of the game, which is surprising because that's Darren Rizzi's specialty. So, yes, the Saints did win, and it goes down as their 5th of the year. And, yes, you can say they're not as bad as the New York Giants. But, man, anyone who watched that game, and I know all of you guys listening did, there wasn't that big of a discrepancy between these two teams, and that, to me, is worrisome. And, I just hope this team knows that when they go into the offseason, they have so much work to do. I don't care how many more wins they add this year. They can add 1 more. They can add 3 more. I don't care what that record looks like. Just know you got a lot of work to be done for you to be a legitimate contender in the NFC. They got so much work for this team. So if they're going to get back on track, it starts with building and finding these young foundational pieces. And while I can't say that this person is a young foundational piece because he can't stay healthy, Kendre Miller finally showed us a little something today. Now, from a stats perspective, 10 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown is not exactly what you're writing home about. That's not something that people are going to start, waving the piece of paper in front of you saying, look at this box score, look what Kendre Miller did. But the difference that he brought to their run game at times in this one, really good cuts, those second efforts, the ability to have good contact balance, which we know is Alvin's specialty, but I think Kendre Miller did a really good job today of keeping his feet up. I think he showed the Saints a little something. And I think for Kendre, all that really matters is whether or not he stays healthy. I think it's very clear that he can be an impact player in the NFL. But can he stay healthy is the question, and will always be the question for him. And I think that if you're putting together a list of, who's going to be the most important player for the Saints or most important players down the stretch for the last 4 games of the season, Kendre Miller's got to be in the top 5. Because if he comes out and stays healthy and makes a couple of, big plays for this ground game, the Saints probably don't feel like running back is as big of a need next year. And you feel like, hey, you know what? It has been frustrating. We drafted this kid in the 3rd round. He's missed a lot of time, but the talent is there. And you saw it today. The talent is there. That's not a question with Kendre. I think if he stays healthy, he could be a heck of a playmaker. But he needs to prove in the last 4 games of the season that he could put together a little stretch. And he doesn't have to rush for 100 yards a game. He doesn't have to rush for 60 yards a game. Can you come in there, take some pressure off of Alvin, make that workload a little bit easier for the vet, especially when you're playing meaningless games at this time of the year, and show that you can stay healthy, that you can be durable through a 4 or 5 game stretch where you're actually getting 10 carries in each game. And if you can do that, awesome. That'd be tremendous for the Saints because you're looking for little wins at this stage in the season. Outside of the actual wins and losses, that's what you're looking for. Can certain young guys step up? And I think today, Kendre Miller, albeit not the greatest sample size and not the stat line that's going to kind of make your eyes pop when you look at it, he gave the Saints a little bit more juice than anyone else offensively today with those extra cuts, with his patience in the backfield, with the second effort. You can even take in a play where it's 2nd and 3. He gets hit about a yard past the line of scrimmage, and you're thinking 3rd down's coming up, and he just kind of lunges out of nowhere to pick up the first. It's stuff like that I think Kendre shows his ability. And even on special teams, man, Kendre Miller had a 31-yard return on a kickoff. So there was burst there from him today. He's fully rested since Dennis Allen decided to put him on IR out of spite. And this is going to be a great opportunity now. 4 more games. Can you step up and show the Saints that you are worthy of being a featured guy on this offense? And he'll have a great opportunity. So I'm excited to see what happens for Kendre Miller. But today, in a game where, I complained a lot about the ugly things that happened on the field, Kendre Miller's game was not one of them. He was one of the bright spots for this team. So the Saints winning is a plus for the record, but it is a thumbs down for the draft stock. We'll talk all about that in just a second. But before we do that, I want to get a quick word from Scott Fickner.
And Jonathan Williams brings it all the way back from the 20-yard line.
What a terrific way to end the first half.
And tonight's game is brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Attorneys. They always fight for the win.
You mean attorney? It's one lawyer. Scott Fickner?
No, there's 2.
Brad Scott and David Fickner.
Well, it's confusing.
That it is. They could have picked a better name.
Scott Fickner, Injury Attorneys, we fight for the win.
Once again, thank you to Scott Fickner. for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. So as I said before, the Saints do win. They're now 3-1 with Darren Rizzi as the interim coach. But the flip side of that is the Saints draft stock taking a hit. And again, I am not one of those people that is going to scream for tanking. You only got 17 weeks of this, and it goes by so quick that I don't want to kind of throw it away and say, hey, let's just hope the Saints lose these games. It's just not how I operate. That said, the more the Saints win, the more it's going to affect their situation. And I think as of now, looking at Tankathon, they're 11th. So coming into today, they were 10th. They haven't really dropped a ton by winning this game. So I guess that is the pro. But if you look over the 4-game stretch, they have gone from a team that was picking top 3 to now picking outside of the top 10. And the only reason I think it could be a little frustrating for people is this team is in need of a blue chip prospect that, from the minute he steps on the field, he's going to be a special player. And the Saints have had those in the past, right? You could tell that back then with Lattimore. You could tell that with Ramczyk. Like, even Fuaga now, like, Fuaga's had moments where he struggled, but then he'll have that Cleveland Browns game where he neutralizes Myles Garrett, and you're like, okay, this is a special talent. And the Saints are in desperate need of one of those special talents. And in a draft where I believe you can get, I keep saying this team needs an edge rusher. If you can get an Abdul Carter from Penn State, I feel like that would change this team dramatically in the defensive line. So I'm not going to say the Saints have to lose these games, and I'm not going to root for them to lose these games. But, man, looking at this team right now, they're about 1 to 2 more wins. I'd say 2 more wins away from back to picking in the mid-teens, feeling like, all right, here we are again. What do you want us to do? We're kind of in no man's land. And that's why the game that I think is really going to set the tone is probably that last game of the season. I believe the Saints probably lose the next 2 games, especially if Derek Carr doesn't play. And look, for all the shit that we give Derek Carr as fans, there is a significant drop-off when he's not playing as opposed to what they have on deck, because you obviously don't have great options in the reserves in Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, at least at the moment. So I expect them to lose to the Commanders next week. I expect them to lose to the Packers on a Monday night game. So then you got Raiders and Buccaneers. I'd expect them to beat the Raiders. It all comes down to that Bucs game. If the Saints finish 6-11, yeah, it's one of those kind of mid records, as people like to call it, but you're probably still picking number 10, maybe 11. If you win 2 more games, you get to 7. All of a sudden, we're talking about the Saints kind of picking in that 15 range. And if the Saints pick towards that 15 range, it's going to be tough, because even though I do believe this team has shown a lot more heart, you can see it. There just isn't a lot of talent. And I talked about this last week when they lost to the Rams. I thought the first half against the Rams, they were actually the better coach team. And that's against a Sean McVay coach team. I thought for a half of football, they were a better coach team. But they don't have the guys. And they need to get a blue chip type of prospect that can immediately flip this team on its head in a great way. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be at the quarterback position, but to have a game changer, even if it's on defense. And I actually think they do need to get better defensively. I think that would pay dividends for them. So, yes, the Saints are winning games, and they've been a lot more fun to watch with Rizzi than they have been with Dennis Allen. But at some point, this team, you don't want to keep getting caught in that, no man's land of picking 13 to 16 range. It's a brutal spot to be picking in. It really feels kind of like purgatory. So we'll see what happens. I don't know for certain that the Saints are going to be stuck in that spot. I mean, they could very well lose the last 4 games of the year if Derek Carr misses all 4. Like, I think it would swing the tide that much. But as of right now, they're picking 11. And for a team that I think needs a lot of help, that just isn't the best spot. But what can you do about it? So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the draft stock. But as of right now, the Saints went from, after losing that Panthers game and Dennis Allen getting fired, to saying, oh, man, Travis Hunter might look good in a Saints uniform, and being like, well, that was a pipe dream that's long lost. And you start looking at other options in the 10 to 12 area of the draft. So let's get into our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. We'll see what you guys have on tap today. We'll start off with Michael Morgan with a super chat. Thank you for the support. Michael says, so many fans are happy with purgatory. Look, it's a tough proposition to be in, right? Like, naturally, the football fan and you want your team to win. Like, fuck losing. It stinks. You spend all summer waiting to get to football, and if your team starts losing, it's kind of depressing in a way. And I totally get why fans would want them to win. And even for today, like, I'm not rooting for the Saints to lose to the Giants. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it. But, it does feel like if the Saints don't make a huge change whether it's coaching, whether it's GM, maybe it's both, in the offseason, then they kind of do feel like they're in purgatory. And that's why I'm not trying to get too caught up in the draft right now, is the Saints could change the viewpoint of this organization this offseason by bringing in a new voice. Like, that alone would change how this team is. Now, whether it be for better or worse, only time will answer that. But I think at least from that standpoint, while we feel like the Saints are stuck, if they do make a big-time coaching change and bring in a different voice, whether it's a familiar face or, a newcomer or even an experienced coach that's kind of looking for that second opportunity like a Mike Vrabel, that could change matters for the Saints. So that's why I'm not too worried yet, but they definitely do feel a little stuck. Eric says the Saints won, but that was bad football. I agree, Eric. Not exactly what you want to show your fans. 14-11. I wouldn't say it was a snoozer, because it was a oddly fun game to watch from a bad standpoint. Like, there was a lot of bad football on the field. So I thought that was kind of amusing. But other than that, it's not what you want to show your fans. Forgive says, Clint is a joke. Don't bring back Carr. Joe Woods is clueless, and hire a new head coach because it's just time for everything to be new. I don't disagree with that. I do think Clint has shown that he is not that dude. And that's why I said, when the Saints had fun in the first 2 weeks of the season, beating the crap out of the Panthers, beating the crap out of the Cowboys, and a lot of people were like, man, Chris, I'm worried about Clint Kubiak getting a head coaching job. I said, let's just let the 15 more weeks left. There's 15 more weeks left. Let's let that play out. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I know they're injured. I know they're injured. I don't want Clint Kubiak back for the Saints, regardless of who the head coach is next year. Like, I just don't think he's that guy. I think they're terrible in the second half when it comes to adjustments. Even the last drive of the game for them, right? So the Giants have a turnover on downs. Saints have a chance to slam the door shut. And they go run play, a play action that ends up having Jake Haener get blown up for like a loss of 9 yards, and then one more run play. So I don't know. I don't love Clint Kubiak. I don't think he's a great coordinator. Cliff says, I'm with that, and everybody was afraid early on Clint that he was going to get grabbed for a head coaching job. LOL, sorely disappointed in his play calling ability this year and lack of ability to adjust. Yeah, there haven't been those adjustments, and it kind of feels like we're kind of stuck in like that bizarro world where instead of having Pete Carmichael calling the plays, now it's just Clint Kubiak. So that's just kind of where we're at. Eric says, I don't know if it's Clint or Carr. It's just garbage. There was guys open today, and he throws it at their knees. Look, there is that part. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not arguing that. And I said during the halftime show, Derek Carr started off this game really well. There was that 98-yard drive, nice pass to MVS, nice pass to Juwan Johnson, and then all of it went away. Low throws, behind the receiver, the interception, and he's arguing that, the receiver didn't run the right route. It was an arm punt. I mean, what the fuck do you want the receiver to do at that point anyway? Even if you're miscommunicating on that one, that ball was lollipopped in the air. It's getting picked off. So Carr's not a good quarterback, and I've said this. He's limited. It is what it is. But I just don't think that Clint does enough in terms of adjustments. I just don't, Cliff says, well, everything is being made new. Let's not forget to make the GM new as well. Look, I think where there's smoke, there's fire. And I do believe that Mickey will come back for another year. But the fact that there are these discussions finally that the Saints could move on from him. He's not tied down to the job forever. I do find that pretty fascinating. It almost feels like the Saints are kind of being told, or at least letting everyone else know that it is not this, satisfactory situation there where they're content with everything. It felt like they were. And I do believe to some degree they probably still are to a certain extent. But for those kind of rumors to come out, I think it's interesting. It almost kind of makes you feel like if there is an alignment between ownership and front office, maybe there are changes this offseason. And if it's not this offseason, maybe it's soon. All I can say for sure, though, is that we have reached the point where patience is running thin because the Saints, because of Drew Brees and Sean Payton, know what success is like and know what sustained success is like. And what they've done the last 3 years is not that. And even if Mickey Loomis is retained for next season, I do believe that would be his last hire he makes if it's the wrong one. I don't think he'll get another chance to redeem himself. I think that would just be it on the spot. Got Cliff joining as a YouTube member. Welcome aboard, Cliff. Thank you for joining us here at Boo Crew Media. We greatly appreciate it, man. Bayou Boys 5-4 says, on another note, how about Brzee? He was a monster today. Brzee was awesome. And that's what you want, right? You need the young players to start stepping up. And I think all the Saints are missing from the defensive tackle spot is to have kind of like a space eater to take some pressure off of Brzee. Because Brzee is not a great run defender. We're not breaking any news here with that. That's just not his thing. But could you imagine putting like a Mason Graham from Michigan? And it's not going to happen because Mason Graham is probably going to go way before the Saints pick. But a Mason Graham with a Brian Brzee in the interior of this defense. So you got the defensive lineman that can shut down the run, and you got the defensive tackle that can get pressure from the interior. And all of a sudden, that's a lethal combo. Because I think one thing the Saints are missing, and it really started last year, is the run defense was going to shit. And I think to have kind of that run-stuffing defensive tackle would change the outlook for this team. So Brzee's been excellent as a pass rusher. Absolutely excellent. He's having a great season. He's at 7.5 sacks already. Could get to 10 by the end of this year. And he probably is on pace to get to 10 by the end of this year. For them to get him some help, especially in the run game, I think that'd be huge for this team. Marcus says Clint needs to go and Derek Carr can go with him. They crashed. Yeah, I mean, it's not a winning combination. It's not. It very much feels like a bridge combination, which I think we all kind of accepted at this point. But both of them, I don't think neither one of them is cut out for New Orleans much longer. Space African Jesus says, toilet bowl champions, let's fucking go. You know what's crazy? I said before, the Saints didn't really get separation. If you just look at the numbers, guys, it's about dead even, right? Passing yards, Saints 200, Giants 213. Both teams, 4.4 yards per play. Third down efficiency, they only completed 5 third downs. You look at penalties, that's the big discrepancy. That's where the Giants got crushed. 12 compared to 6. Even time of possession, though, it was about 32 minutes to 28 minutes. Turnovers, they both had 1 turnover. Sacks allowed, they both allowed 2 sacks each. It was like a mirror image of ass between these two teams. That's what it kind of was. Just Call Me Trey says that had to be one of the worst wins I've ever witnessed in my life. Also, do not play Carr the rest of the year. I mean, we'll see what happens. I haven't seen an update yet, and I'm sure there'll be one from the media at some point. But I kind of be shocked if he plays again this season, right? Like, that left arm did not seem pretty good, or left hand, excuse me. And we'll see. That I think that's the concern. Saints will probably have an update later this week, maybe in a day or two. But I'll tell you, Derek Carr, if he's going to miss the next 2 games, you might as well sit him for the 2 after, right? Like, what's the fucking point of playing him? And that's where you can, I don't want to say tank, because, again, I'm not a tanker. But that's where you can help yourself out a little bit. You're going to get a better evaluation on some of these young guys who will have a little bit more help around them. Remember, Rattler and Hayner did not have Eric McCoy on the O-line. So you might get an extra evaluation on these young quarterbacks, and you're probably going to help your draft stock in the process. But I would guess if the injury's bad enough that he's going to miss a week or 2, you probably just shut Derek Carr down anyway. Boston Ballfont says this was the worst football game I've ever witnessed. If Rizzy wins the rest of the games besides Green Bay, do you think he becomes the next coach? I don't know, man. It's a great question. It's an excellent question. I've always said, like, it matters how they win. And last 2 weeks, Saints look like they've kind of run out of gas. And I think today they only won because the Giants stink. So let's see, if they go beat Washington, that'll change my perspective a little bit. How do you beat Washington? Obviously, that matters. But if they go beat Washington, I think that'd be a pretty good win for him to put on the resume. He needs a signature win. Browns aren't a signature win. They're well below 500. Giants are definitely not a signature win. They're competing for the number 1 pick. And even the Falcons, who, yes, that could be the signature win. They're not looking too good right now, man. They are not looking too good. So we'll see what happens. But, if he goes and honestly, if he wins the next 2 games, maybe that would be the statement, right? If you go beat Commanders and Packers, 2 playoff teams, that would help his stock. But if the Saints just go about where he loses those 2 games, they win the Raiders game, and let's say they lose the Bucs game, it's just the same stuff that we've seen, right? They'll beat the really bad teams, and then any team that's kind of in their range, they'll lose to, and then anyone better, they definitely won't win. So I think for me that I would guess he's not going to become the head coach. I think even if he goes 3-1 in the next 4, I get them to 8-9. I mean, 8-9 is not a bad record given what he was handed, which was a 2-7 team. But I I don't know. I just don't think he's going to be the head coach. And maybe I'm wrong. I just got that vibe that he's not going to be. Bayou Boys 5-4 says Carr missed some throws, but the play calling was terrible. The O-line was terrible. Yeah, I did not like what I saw from the O-line. No doubt about it. Carr did not have a lot of time. And again, I mentioned before, when Dexter Lawrence misses this game and you have trouble with that defensive line of the Giants, that's concerning to me. That is very concerning to me. Also, for the love of God, stop putting tight ends on the other team's best edge rusher. They did it last week with Jared Verse, and that worked terribly for them. And this week, they put 2 tight ends on Brian Burns, and to me, Jared Verse kicked your ass last week. Brian Burns blew that play up this week. Stop doing it. And I know it's a matchup thing that they like, but just stop. Cliff says, for real, Chris Preach, nobody needed OT from this stinker today. Yeah, it would have been brutal, man. OT with these two teams, with the way they played, would have been brutal. Donald says, damn, we're double ass. No more QB in the first round for us. Yeah, I think that one's kind of done anyway. And honestly, guys, and I know they need a quarterback, but if you don't love this quarterback class anyway, go out there and get yourself a game changer defensively or offensively. I think that for New Orleans, they're not a quarterback away, and if they don't believe that their guy is in this draft class, it's fine. But I do believe, yeah, I mean, I didn't think they were in the market for a quarterback in this draft class, at least at the top of the order prior to today. And obviously after today, definitely don't think that's the case either with where they're at. So Boston says our starting O-line looked terrible today against the backup players in New York's D-line. Yep, not great. Also said our D-line sucks at containing QBs. A big thing that I hated about this game, a really big thing that I hated about this game. You know, Drew Lock had 59 rushing yards. 59 from Drew Lock. Chad says, what do you think about the attention that Kubiak's supposedly garnering if he's let go? Not worried about it. And I honestly don't think he's going to get like a marquee job. I don't think Kubiak is that dude. And look, this is his second stint, by the way, as an offensive play caller. It's not his first, and he has not adjusted well enough for my liking, in my opinion. And again, he's got 4 more games left. And I mentioned as Kendre Miller, he's got time to try to progress. Same shit can be said about Kubiak. 4-game sample size. What are you going to do? Carlito's Way says we need a whole new everything. Rooting for Rizzy, but got to start new. Please, Gail, sell Saints and Bells. Who.712 says, honestly, at this point, I'm torn between criticizing Carr, risking his body being detrimental to the team, and respecting him for risking his body to getting a first down after stale play all game. I mean, look, you respect the player, right? Going all out. I can't disrespect him for that at all, And I've said I'd like to see him run a little bit more because I actually think he's a decent athlete. But look, it's a tough one. You feel bad for him, and to a certain extent, I really do feel for him. Like that's a really tough blow. But it happens. It's part of the game. It's a violent game, and I just hope he's okay hand wise. Like that, it looked like a really rough landing. But no, I'm not going to criticize him for risking his body. Saints were stalling. He sees kind of daylight there. He's going for it. You just don't expect it, right? You don't expect Derek Carr to go, Jeff Hardy. But, hey, I mean, it kind of happened there. Aaron says, I agree, but let's just say that Dennis Allen was still the head coach. We've witnessed the same scenario this year, but with a different outcome. I'm certainly not saying rejoice, but simply what if? I understand that aspect. I just feel like, and if you guys think I'm wrong, that's totally okay. I understand. I just don't think this Saints team is talented enough. And I also think the Saints team probably needs to get some new messaging in that building. It just feels like it's a lot of the same shit. Now, I will say this, Aaron. I think had Rizzy coached this entire season, Saints would have a better record right now. I genuinely do. I think there's a lot of games that could have gone different. Maybe the Eagles game goes different at the end. Maybe the Falcons game the first time goes different at the end. So I think that, Dennis Allen, don't get me wrong, big reason that they lost a lot of games this year. But I just also think this team has kind of met its, I don't want to say, it's kind of ran its course, I want to say. Whether it's roster-wise, whether it's coaching-wise, like, I just think they're kind of ready to start new. Kyle says, I'm happy for the win, though it was ugly. I'm really pissed at Clint Kubiak and his play calling. He's becoming a big concern, and it looked like he was selling out in this game. Yeah, I mean, as we said before, Kyle, I don't think Kubiak's that dude. Haven't really felt like he's been that dude since probably week 2. So it is what it is. Hopefully he could kind of finish the season strong, but I'm ready for them to start anew at OC. Red Joseph says, just leaving MetLife Stadium with my friend and her husband. She's a Saints fan. He's a salty Giants fan. Giants are in a weird spot, right? Like, you're probably better off just letting Brian Daboll ride out the next 4 games and then firing him. But at some point, do you just let that kind of fester to the point where guys are selling out before the season's even over? Like, think about the Giants real quick, guys. They have not won a game since October 6th, and they went from being 2-3 now to 2-11. So anytime you go on an 8-game losing streak, and us Saints fans will know we watch them go on a 7-game losing streak, that shit is not easy. And I'm not sure what the right decision is, but that is a franchise. Saints are in a bad spot. Don't get me wrong. Giants might be in a worse spot. And it's tough. I don't know what you do. Like, do you fire the coach to give yourself a little bit of juice and make sure those players feel like their complaints are heard? But at the same time, they're 4 games away from maybe securing the number 1 pick. So maybe you just wait. Cliff says Kubiak is like the Prescott of OCs. If he's ahead, he's good, but he doesn't have any plays or any answers if the O is behind, and he cannot adjust to save his life. I don't hate that comparison. I like Dak Prescott. I think Dak Prescott's a good quarterback, but I do like that comparison. I think that's a very good comparison. Forgive says Kirk Cousins is lost man right now. Do you think they'll bench him next game for Michael Penix? Kind of think they should, right? Here's the thing. I wish all NFC South teams had this kind of, realistic take. Just because you won the division doesn't mean you are a good team. The NFC South's been bad for like 3 years now. And if I'm the Falcons, what is more important to me right now? Trying to see if I can figure this shit out with Kirk Cousins, or if I can get an early evaluation on Michael Penix if he's ready. And man, their last couple games to finish the season, it's the perfect slate to play Penix. If he plays well and looks good, A, you might still make the playoffs anyway, but B, you get to see something from your young quarterback kind of build into next year. And if you just keep Kirk out there, what's the big deal? If he has some good games against bad teams, what the fuck does that matter? Like, you're still going to be in the same spot next year where at some point you're going to have to pull the plug on Kirk Cousins. So, again, not my problem because we're all Saints fans here, but, like, it's a great question. If I'm the Falcons, you have the Raiders, Giants, Commanders, Panthers to finish the season. Bench Kirk Cousins, play Michael Penix, and see what happens. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm a Kirk Cousins fan. But the last couple games, no touchdowns, 1 pick. No touchdowns, 1 pick. No touchdowns, 4 interceptions. No touchdown, 2 interceptions. You can't go 4 games without a touchdown while throwing 8 picks in that span and expect to keep your job. I just don't see it. So, I mean, if I'm them, I'm getting Penix in there pretty soon. Kyle says, cut Brian Brzee for being a hero. The nerve. He was tremendous. He was tremendous. Kyle says, Kendre Miller did well in this game. Hopefully he consistently plays really well for the rest of the season. Brian Brzee should be a starting defensive tackle. He's proved it, especially in this game. I mean, Brzee as a pass rusher has star-making capabilities. I truly believe that. He's a really bad run defender, and I think that's a problem. But I also think if the Saints go get themselves an elite run-stuffing defensive tackle, let's say via the draft, all of a sudden, you're taking a lot of pressure off of Brzee. Michael says, I'm not saying Saints should tank, but the future doesn't look bright at all. Also said, but this season, another wash and aging players that we depend on too much. Not a lot of talent, and that's why we need that game-changing player. We don't have any. Yeah, look, Michael, I don't disagree with you. I'm kind of in the same boat with you. Like, I don't want the Saints to lose, but I also understand that this team needs talent. And winning these games just feels like you're delaying the inevitable. On the other hand, you're not going to get vets who have a lot of pride to willingly just kind of fall on the sword. That's just not going to happen. And I don't expect it to, nor do I want that to happen. But something's got to give, right? And you just kind of hope in the offseason that's what gives. Because this team desperately needs some type of shakeup to some degree. Cam says, what was Carr doing / thinking? What was he thinking? He's trying to make a play, right? Trying to help his team out. But, in the grand scheme of things, guy almost got himself killed. So that part's pretty rough. Kyle says this organization just refuses nonsense to not see, I guess is what you're going for. This organization just refuses to not see the big picture and making it worse with cap decisions. I mean, cap decisions, it is what it is. I don't think that's going to get any worse from now on. I think the Saints are going to start being financially responsible, thankfully. But they're not going to get out of that for a while, right? You're going to have another 2 years of dealing with bad cap. And next year's going to be bad cap for sure. The question and the way to solve it, you got to draft well. You can no longer be drafting guys that don't do shit for you. And that means if you're the Saints, you can't afford to have Isaiah Foskey's. You got to make sure guys like Kendre Miller make an impact. And that's why Miller for the next 4 games is going to be, really, really important. But That's the key. When you don't have cap space, if you draft well, you get yourself out of hell pretty quick. And for New Orleans, that's going to be paramount for them in the offseason. You got to get a couple more playmakers, 4 playmakers from the draft that are going to make a difference for them. Troy says the Giants were surely holding the Saints po' boy and how to be a bad team. Giants, at some point in this game, I thought we were witnessing like legitimate tanking. Not even kidding. And I don't even care at that point. Like, they're a bad team. They're 2-11, but there are moments where I'm like, I think this team is actually tanking. Kyle says Brzee and Granderson are the only bright spots on the D-line, but Brzee has been playing on expectations. Again, Brzee should be starting defense tackle. I'm shocked he's not. Look, Brian Brzee is a starter. Like, don't read into anything the Saints do from like what your game day program will say. Like, they know he's their best defensive tackle from a playmaking perspective. They know if someone's going to make a big play in the interior, it's going to be him. So wouldn't really worry all about that. Carl says game was trash. Sponsored by River Parish Trash Disposal. It was a bad game. I can't agree anymore. Like I said, it was a toilet bowl game, in my opinion. Kyle says, tanking is a crock of shit, in my opinion. I don't care if this offends people, so the people who believe in tanking are absolute donkeys and don't know jack shit about rebuilding. People who believe that purposely losing and tanking just to get a draft pick that might end up being horrible are fugazi and, again, fucking donkeys. Look, I don't know if I would have used that kind of verbiage there, but look, I've seen the Jets lose a ton of games year in, year out. They're still bad. I've seen the Jaguars have the number 1 pick multiple times. They're still bad. I've seen the Browns have the number 1 pick multiple times. They're still bad. Like, a lot of the teams that are bad annually, getting a draft pick is not going to save them. You either have the guys that can establish the culture, you don't. So I do agree. I don't think tanking is the solution to things. If the Saints fight really hard and lose a couple of these games down the stretch, close loss to the Commanders, close loss to the Packers, that'll serve you much better than getting your ass kicked and looking like a team that just can't wait to kind of, kick their shoes off and lay on a beach in Cancun come February. Like, to me, you don't want that. Who Dat 712 says the QB decision for the next year will be interesting. If the Saints draft Milroe, though, I'm going to scream nonstop. Like that lady who did after Trump won in 2016, Milroe would be a joke of an NFL QB. He's probably going to be the most polarizing, I think, in this draft. I think there are special traits with him, but there's also reckless traits with him. And there's also terrible inconsistency with Jalen Milroe. So whoever takes him, you're gambling. And the later you're taking, the less of a gamble it is, obviously. But it's going to be interesting because he's a player where at 1 minute I'm like, oh, he is a special talent. And the next minute I'm like, okay, this guy is not an NFL caliber quarterback. So it's a weird spot that he puts himself in consistently. Cherry G says Brzee MVP. Carl says, I'd like to thank Coach Rizzi, but it's time. We'll see. I'd imagine they'll make a change in the offseason. Kyle says Kubiak follows Kyle Shanahan's philosophy, which involves no adjustments. Kubiak has been frustratingly inconsistent and being conservative, which this offense shouldn't be. I agree with that. Jerry says Saints win and Falcons lose. Saints 41 says that the Falcons win, asking for a friend. You can keep asking that. I mean, it's about, 4 weeks straight now, and shit has not gone their way. Ed says if Daniel Jones played, the Saints lose. I agree. That just shows how ugly today's game was. If Daniel Jones played today, they probably lose, especially because Daniel Jones has had success against the Saints in the past. He's pretty mobile. I mean, Drew Lock had 59 rushing yards, so I kind of agree with that. Michael says, I can't see us beating the Commanders or Packers, especially without Carr. I would second that. I don't think they have a chance in those games without Carr, And we'll see what happens, waiting for word on the full extent of the injury outside of them saying it's a left-hand injury. But yeah, if he doesn't play in those 2 games, there is no way in hell that I would pick the Saints to win either game. D23 says, Carr saw Washington and Lattimore coming up and thought, nah, I'm out. Jack says, hey, let's give Carr a quarterback rush instead of our star running back. Kubiak was such a moron for this game. The funny thing is, and initially you're like, oh, wow, like he kept it. He pulled it on the RPO, and he's got some open grass. But then, like I said, he went full Jeff Hardy, and Swanton bombs himself into an injury, and that's just tough. Ed says Saints should have been able to run the ball, and the 30th ranked run defense O-line sucked. That was probably the most embarrassing part of today, right? And I thought they were going to run all over the Giants. No Dexter Lawrence. Bad run defense even with Dexter Lawrence. I thought this was a really great script for them. And instead, the Saints go out and kind of crap all over themselves in the run game at times, and that was tough. Jack says Carr's been bad, but the last 4 weeks, Kirk Cousins has 0 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. Yeah, Kirk has been a next-level brutal for the Falcons over the last couple weeks. Kyle says we had our starting O-line and they played very underwhelming and possibly horseshit. Run game should have been rolling, but it was getting stuffed. I agree with that. D23 says Kendre and Brzee were the only players that did anything real today. I thought Kool-Aid had some nice plays, but inconsistency. But for a rookie, you like to see him make some plays there. So that was good. I thought Demario had a really good game today. I thought Demario did a really good job, whether it was in the pressure. Obviously, he had the interception. I like what I saw from Demario today. Offensively, MVS played okay. Juwan had a decent game, but nothing crazy. I think Kendre, obviously, and Brzee would be the bright spots there. D23 says, I really don't think the microscope is on Ruiz enough today. Isn't the first game that he gets blown off the ball consistently. I don't think he's a good player. And I do agree with you. I think for some reason, we've kind of just let it slip under the rug, but he's not a good football player. And I would agree that he's gotten blown up a lot of times this year. Cool Sports Rhyme says, I'm ignorant on this. Since Gail Benson overrode Loomis and fired DA, can Gail make Loomis give up on his GM duties and just be a VP? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If the Saints, decide, hey, we don't want you to be the voice of this team, they 1,000% can go out there and say, you know what? Enough. You're out of this spot. There's no doubt. Lance says Max Crosby or Dexter Lawrence in trade. Teams ahead of us in draft most likely need offense, so we need a solid shot at Graham. Carr and Kubiak are bridge for the new coach. Probably. I don't know about the first one, though. I don't know if that's going to happen, and if either one of those big dogs are going to get traded. Crosby's great. Dexter Lawrence, great player. If you're those bad teams, you can't just afford to get rid of all these guys. Rose City says this team is putrid. At the very least, they're incredibly underwhelming. Lance says, could Kubiak be eyeing head coaching jobs? He's no benefit in winning for Rizzi, and he's using the injury to cover his butt. It's not going to work that way, though, right? You put 14 points up against the Giants. I don't care what excuses you might want to use. No one's going to look at that tape and be like, all right, you're going to lead our football team. I just don't see it. Cool Sports Rhyme says, Chris, who would you rather go with, Jay Kaner or Spencer Rattler? Truthfully, I think they probably should just roll with Jake and just see how he plays for a little bit. I think, you gave Rattler a little bit of a shot there. Obviously, it was tough circumstances, but play Jake for a little, see how he does, and at least get an evaluation on him, because you expect Rattler to be back next year anyway, right? He's going to be a second-year guy. So I would definitely go with Jake and just see what he gives you for a little bit. Carr thought it was Cirque du Soleil or something, shaking my head. That's a funny one. I couldn't believe it. When he went airborne, I'm like, what the fuck is he doing? And then obviously your reaction changed a little bit. You start feeling bad for the guy because he got hurt. Kyle says, been disappointed for Kubiak. We had high expectations for him, but he has now become a big liability. So after this year, we believe we should move on from him and go get someone like Todd Monken. I'd imagine Monken's going to be sitting in Baltimore for a little bit. That would just be my guess, though. Cliff says, wouldn't be sad to move on from Kubiak at all. Good call. Yep. D23 says Kamara showing that captain duty by trying to calm Rizzi down when he went after Hayball was good to see from Alvin. Alvin's the leader of this team. I don't think we've ever questioned that. I think we all know he is. So, in that spot, I understand why Rizzi was frustrated, but I also understand why Kamara is trying to step in, because you probably don't want that to be going on for too long. Richard says, does Prentice have stone hands? Because you can't keep giving it to Kamara. He's getting beat up for short yards. Honestly, I think just change it up, whether it's Kendre using him a little bit more. They used Jamal a couple times today, although you guys know my stance on Jamal. But I guess you could argue you don't really want to use a fullback anymore. Fullbacks are kind of gone from today's NFL. Lance says nobody worth anything is going to want to coach this team. Flores is a gamble. Vrabel won't want it. Johnson, Chicago. Someone will want to coach this team. There's only 32 of these jobs in the NFL. Someone will take it. I know it is not an appealing job, and I 1,000% will agree with anyone that says the Saints job is not attractive. 1,000% agree. But someone will take it. There's only 32 of these bad boys in the league. Someone will definitely take this job. Jillian says, do we think Carr is out for the season? I think it's too early to tell. My guess would be if it's like a week-to-week thing or a day-to-day thing, like Carr is going to fight his ass off to be back in the lineup. He doesn't like to miss games. But we'll see. I think it's too early to kind of say. So if you guys have any more comments, we'll get to them. Before we do that, though, I want to get a quick word from DraftKings Sportsbook.
Getting some holiday shopping done this weekend? While you're at it, pick up some touchdowns. They're on sale at DraftKings Sportsbook. DraftKings has doorbuster profit boosts and bet one, get one promotions on all types of touchdown bets. Grab some TDs with DraftKings Sportsbook. They're on sale from Thanksgiving through Cyber Monday. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code BOOT to opt in. That's code BOOT, BOOT, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over, age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in New Hampshire, Oregon, and Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at nfl.com/terms.
Once again, thank you to DraftKings Sportsbook. We greatly appreciate it. Going to wrap it up with any other comments that you guys have and go from there. D23 says, I sighed loudly when Jamal dropped that opening kickoff. I'm not trying to be rude, man. I just don't know what the hell he's in there for. I really don't understand, especially on kickoffs. Kyle says, would you rather stick with the wide zone offense or go back to the West Coast offense? Truthfully, that's a good question. It all honestly comes down to your quarterback and who you have. I think for what the Saints have right now, if they're going back with Carr for another year, probably wouldn't mind having a similar offensive structure. But again, I think it depends on the quarterback. Marcus says, fire everybody in the offseason, start new. I kind of think that's what's going to happen, but we'll see. D23 says, Chase Young, I believe, is basically Isaiah Foskey, but with a first-round label. So many people know his name. I've not seen him make an actual pass rush move. I mean, he's definitely better than Foskey. Foskey's like, I don't want to say borderline unplayable because he did get some snaps today, but for the most part of his career so far has been borderline unplayable. But Chase Young's been living off that rookie season for a little bit. Lance says head coaching candidates, no big names because they're not coming. Head coaching candidates, again, that are probably going to be linked to the Saints. Aaron Glenn's going to probably be towards the top of the list. Whether or not Saints fans want that, he will be. Joe Brady will probably be linked to the Saints, especially because his history, just like Aaron Glenn's. As far as experienced coaches, I wouldn't agree with it, but I saw Jeremy Fowler of ESPN mention Vance Joseph, who's kind of revitalizing his career right now in Denver. Would imagine the Saints will look at Belichick. Again, I'm not condoning that, but I think they'll look at him just because of his, the respect that he garners around the league. But I kind of think Aaron Glenn will be the next head coach of the Saints, and that's just my early gut feeling, but that could change, Kyle says, I don't know why Foskey's on the team. He should be cut like A.T. Perry was. I think you're about one more, year away. I mean, next year you play Foskey. If he doesn't do anything, he's going to get cut before that fourth year anyway, if I had to guess. So we'll see what happens. So we're going to wrap it up here, guys, with our closing arguments by Scott McNair, Injury Lawyers. I think, as I said before, at this point in the Saints season, yes, they won today. They did improve to 5-8. And, in terms of a win is a win, I totally get that. What I'm looking for now is if you can get some of these younger players down the stretch to look like game changers. Brian Brzee was a game changer today, and he's had a really nice, second half of the season. Kendre Miller, to some degree, was a game changer today. Can he do that for 4 more games? That would bode well for his stock. Can a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry, a rookie, make big-time plays for the Saints? That will be really huge. Can Alontae Taylor continue to develop on the outside? That will be important. So, for me, that's what I'm looking for. That is absolutely, to me, the wins that I'm going for, not so much the win-loss category. Like, how do your young players step up in these next 4 games, if they step up at all? That's what I'll be looking at for sure. Now, I did say that was my closing argument. I see 2 more takeaways. I'm just going to get to them before I wrap up. Cool Sports Rhyme says, I'd take Joe Brady over Aaron Glenn. Give me the offensive guy over defensive guy. I totally get that. I do believe the Saints will probably love Aaron Glenn's leadership skills, though. And as for Doozy saying Vance Joseph, failed ex-coach with great DC skills, haven't we already done that? Couldn't agree more. That's why I'm very hesitant about that idea. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, guys, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for coming in, sending your thoughts, your comments, all that. You guys have been great throughout this season. Hope you have a great start to your week coming up. And of course, stay on the lookout for more content here from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.